There is something you do so automatically, you do not even recognize it as a choice. Someone tells you about a success. Someone posts something that signals they are ahead. Someone arrives somewhere you have been quietly trying to reach. And before the conversation has ended, something in you has already calculated the distance between where they are and where you are, has already found yourself lacking, has already, in some part of the mind, resented them for it. And then the guilt arrives on top of the comparison, because you know it is not generous, and you dislike yourself for it, and that self-dislike becomes its own fuel for the next comparison. And the loop closes. I want to tell you something that most teachings on this subject avoid. The problem is not that you are a jealous person. The problem is that comparison has become a habit with a reward. And habits with rewards do not respond to willpower or self-judgment. They respond only to being understood completely at the root. So let us go to the root. When you compare yourself to another and find yourself lacking, something strange happens. It feels terrible, and yet you go back to it repeatedly. Why would anyone return to something that hurts? Because the comparison is not purely pain. There is something in it that functions like a reward. The comparison produces a brief, sharp sense of clarity, of knowing exactly where you stand, of having a measurement. For a mind that feels uncertain about its own worth, any measurement, even a painful one, is temporarily preferable to the uncertainty of having no measurement at all. This is the addiction structure. Not pleasure-seeking, certainty-seeking. The comparison gives you a number, a position, a temporary answer to the question you are always quietly running underneath everything. Am I enough? The answer the comparison provides is usually no, but it is an answer, and the mind, desperate for any solid ground, returns to that answer again and again, even though it destroys the ground beneath you each time. You are not comparing because you are weak or envious or petty. You are comparing because somewhere the question of your own worth is still open, and you have been trying to answer it from the outside, through measurement, through position, through the distance between yourself and others. The measurement never closes the question. It can't, because the question is not actually about them. But here is what makes this particularly difficult to escape. The moment you try to stop comparing, you often begin comparing your attempts not to compare. Am I less jealous than I used to be? Am I making progress faster than other people who struggle with this? The mechanism turns on itself, because it is not a character flaw you can resolve through effort. It is a loop. And you cannot break a loop by adding more loops around it. So what does actually work? The first intervention is what I call an attention fast. Not a fast from comparison in the sense of white-knuckling your way through the impulse. A fast from feeding it. There is a difference between a thought arising and a thought being given 20 minutes of elaboration. Comparison arrives uninvited. But what happens next is a choice, even if it rarely feels like one. The moment the comparison appears, and you will feel it, it has a specific physical signature, a tightening, a slight contraction somewhere in the chest or stomach. That is the moment of opportunity. Not the moment to argue with it. Not the moment to tell yourself it is wrong to feel this way. Simply the moment to withdraw your attention from the story before it builds. What the thought wants is narrative. It wants you to ask, why do they have that and I don't? It wants you to follow that into a long construction of what this means about your worth, your choices, your future. The narrative is where the suffering lives. The initial flash of comparison is momentary. The story you build on top of it can last hours. Withdraw attention before the building begins, not once, each time. And over weeks, you are not fighting the comparison. You are simply refusing to give it the raw material it needs to become suffering. The second intervention is what has been called in my tradition mudita, sympathetic joy. And I want to speak about this honestly because it is almost always taught in a way that makes it feel impossible. The instruction is usually, rejoice in the good fortune of others, and the immediate reaction is, but I don't feel that. And the teaching says, practice it until you do, which can feel like being asked to pretend, but the actual practice is more subtle and more honest than that. You are not being asked to feel immediate, genuine happiness at someone else's success when you are drowning in comparison. That would be performance. What you are being asked to do is something smaller, to pause before the resentment builds and acknowledge one true thing. That person's gain is not your loss. This is not a feeling. It is an honest observation. Their success did not take something from you. The world is not a closed container where one person having more means another person has less. And yet comparison operates on exactly that assumption. As if worth were finite. As if there were a fixed amount of success available and they have claimed the portion that was meant for you. That assumption is false, and recognizing it as false repeatedly begins to weaken the emotional architecture that comparison is built on. The third intervention is the one that changes everything at the root, but it requires real honesty. The question beneath all comparison is, am I on the right path? And comparison feels like it answers that question because it shows you where others are on their paths. But it cannot answer that question because it is the wrong question. The right question is, am I on my path? And that is a question that has nothing to do with anyone else. There is a teaching I have sat with for a long time, in the Buddha's own words, about wandering into what is not your territory. He spoke specifically to monks about this. The range you are meant to occupy is your own direct experience, your own body, mind, values, circumstances. When you wander from that territory into the territory of measuring yourself against others, you lose your footing. Not because others are threats, because you have left the only ground that actually supports you. Your path has a specific shape. It has a particular history, a particular set of conditions, a particular direction that is yours alone. The person you are comparing yourself to has a different path, a different history, different conditions, different suffering, different inner life. You are not behind them. You are simply elsewhere, on a different road. Measuring the distance between two roads that are not going to the same place is a calculation that produces only confusion. When the comparison arises and you feel the familiar pull, try this. Instead of asking why they are there and I am here, ask this single question. What is the next honest step on my path? Not how to get to where they are. What is true and right for you today, given who you actually are and where you are actually standing? That question lands differently in the body. It has a different quality. It is grounded. It is yours. It moves the attention from the horizontal axis of comparison, from side to side, looking at others, to the vertical axis of integrity, which is the relationship between you and your own truth. The addiction to comparison is strong. It has roots that go deep and long. I am not suggesting it dissolves quickly. In my own practice, I have caught the movement of comparison arising in the most unexpected moments, in quiet, in supposed contentment. It is tenacious. But what changes with genuine practice is the speed at which you recognize it. And with that recognition comes the ability to choose, even briefly, not to follow it into the story. You are not trying to become someone who never compares. You are training yourself to be someone who sees the comparison arrive, feels the familiar pull, and chooses to return to your own territory before the suffering builds. That return, practiced over months and years, gradually loosens the grip of the addiction. Not because you have suppressed it, because you have finally found something more solid to stand on than another person's position. Your own life, your own path, your own next honest step, that is the only ground that has ever actually held you. The only question worth asking this evening is not where they are. It is whether you are living honestly on your own path, and only you can answer that.